Hi, everybody, and welcome to Key Strategies for Supporting AAC Learners with Angelman Syndrome, Parent and Professional Reflections. My name is Kate McLaughlin. I am a speech-language pathologist and AAC specialist. I work in Connecticut in private practice, supporting families and school districts. I work with a variety of learners with Angelman syndrome, and you can find me online at the AAC Coach on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm joined by Taina Moretti, and she can introduce herself.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, my name's Taina Moretti. I'm the mom to a 10-year-old little boy with Angelman syndrome, and we began our AAC journey back in 2014. When we first started our journey, I did not know exactly the correct path to take. I was completely overwhelmed as a newly diagnosed parent, but I definitely found my way through the support of professionals and families. And eventually I found Kate, who has been a huge mentor to myself and now our school's team as well. So my purpose of being here today is to hope to provide some support, motivation, and kind of just shed some light on our journey, and hope you follow us along at some point. You can follow us on Instagram at AAC all day, every day. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, Ty's sharing some really cool stuff on there, so I definitely follow along. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk through key learning strategies for learners with Angelman syndrome and how we can best support them as they are beginning their AAC journey and learning academics. All right, so we are going to take a look at 8 key learning strategies to support your learners with Angelman syndrome. These are strategies that I've developed in collaboration with Linda Burkhart, who is a wonderful resource and source of information. If you don't know of Linda Burkhart's work, I really recommend that you check her out at lindaburkhart.com. All right. The first one we're going to talk about is engagement and motivation. When we're working with our learners with Angelman syndrome, we want to be helping them learn and discover things that they find interesting, that they want to talk about, because developmentally, we know that all people, not just our learners with Angelman, work on their own agenda before they're ready to follow anybody else's. So if we are taking advantage of the things that they find interesting, learning more about those things, talking about those things, it's going to be far more easy for our learners to attend to those activities and grow their knowledge of those activities. When we're thinking about engagement and motivation, there are some things that we know support motivation for all people. And one of those things is choice and agency. When you're working for something that you've selected that's important to you, you're far more likely to be engaged and motivated. You're also far more likely to be engaged and motivated if you're working to build connections with other people. So thinking about how learning can be growing our learners' abilities to interact with other people and to enjoy their relationships with other people. That is motivating. And the other thing that's motivating is growing your competence to achieve your own goals. So as our learners are developing their skills, be it to communicate or academically, if those skills are helping them be able to achieve things they want to achieve, they will be naturally motivated. So Ty, do you want to talk a little bit about how you thought about engagement and motivation early on in your AAC journey with Joey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it actually wasn't that clear for me in the beginning. I was so focused on just the modeling piece and getting through, remembering exactly what I had learned in my pod trainings. And I was so focused on that I think I kind of lost sight of what was probably said or taught at the pod trainings that I had attended. And those were the ones that I had attended were actually run by Linda Burkhart and supported or hosted by you, Kate. But it took me a long time to kind of make that connection. And it's not that I forgot about it. entirely, or that I didn't want to kind of get down to Joey's level and find things that were important to him. But I can recall you saying to me at some point, and I think you were sitting with us actually in the kitchen one day, and you noticed something that I didn't notice. And I believe it was, there was something on TV, and I was, continuing on with a conversation with Joey and modeling what I thought, he was referring to, which was like right in front of us, but it was beyond that. He was looking up and over, whether it was a plant or something, into the living room, and the TV's mounted on the wall. And I can't recall exactly what was there, but you made that connection. And that moment was like, Ty, like, take it back a step. You have to like look beyond, what's right in front of us, because our kids like see so much, like, as you listen to presenters and like you kind of go through your early stages of being a newly diagnosed parent, you will hear things like, our kids can't look and listen at the same time, or, they might be drawing their attention to something else. So that really, really helped me and kind of allowed me to think beyond my own, beyond my own agenda. And really toss it back onto, Joey's, and like, what could he possibly be interested in? Like, I look at things with a much bigger lens now. And that's really provided a lot of great support for him and pushed him along, in his journey. And I personally think he has his own goals, even though we don't really talk about it in that way. I think Kate, you talked about, connections and building relationships and stuff like that. I think he really enjoys doing certain things with certain people, and the connections that he has built through his AAC brings out even more language. I can't kind of feel like that's what I'm seeing more and more as he gets older. So I hope that helps a bit.
It seems like too, it's so much of it is following their. So Joey has shown us over the years the things that he finds interesting, and by digging into those things, we've learned more about him, and we've created more opportunities for learning to happen. And I'm thinking about him and his interest in astronauts a while back, exposure to astronauts. I believe we watched a video about slime in space, and Joey, even in that moment, didn't seem particularly engaged, or wasn't able to show us maybe that he was really interested, because he was taking it all in. But then afterwards it followed with some interest in astronauts that grew. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, shortly after that session, it probably was a day or so, we were out shopping at Home Goods, which is probably one of his most favorite places to go outside of Target. But it was just he and I, and, we're walking down the aisle, and he spotted, it's like a rocket. I think it's like Green Toys, like rocket. And he went right over to that and was like holding it up in the air to like show me. And like, it was like, yeah, yes. And then we continued on, and we talked a little bit about that in the aisle. And then we were carrying on through the aisles, and we found another little ceramic astronaut that's holding like a flag. And of course I had to buy all of that. Like he made all these connections, and it definitely had to have tied back to that conversation that we had with you, or that session we had with you just a bit ago, or, a few days prior rather. And from there, it's just, we built on that, like you said, like when we were watching that video and, of slime in space, like he definitely didn't seem to engage, but I feel like that was just like a moment for him that we kind of just built on something that was really cool for him and something that means a lot to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, by kind of taking his cues about what he was finding interesting. So you going to the store and noticing his interest, then and following that and talking about that with the AAC and reading more about it or watching shows about it, and allows him to grow his interest and gives you lots of things to talk about that become real valuable learning. So following the lead of our learners and figuring out what they're interested in, and growing our interactions around those things, even if they don't seem to be particularly what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it can be the smallest thing. It doesn't have to be anything formal. It doesn't have to be anything super sophisticated. If they're interested in it, following that and talking about it, there's so much learning that can happen there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially like with all of the launches going on right now, he will stop in the middle of the living room when there's a commercial on for, just a space launch coming up, or just I think Allstate actually has like a commercial where there's like astronauts like soaring through across the screen or whatever, and he just like will freeze, and like we have a quick conversation about it. It wasn't planned. It's all very natural, and those are the powerful moments, and I think those moments have helped him build his language even more.
Yeah, those are the powerful moments, and often so much more powerful than the lessons that we structure and plan ahead and try and have that
Yep.
don't always go according to plan. Those moments where he or any learner really is naturally interested, is they're such powerful, because the motivation and the engagement are there.
For
All
sure.
right. All right, let's think about another one of our learning strategies. The next one I have here is modeling communication and interactions using robust AAC. So I want to talk a little bit about what is robust AAC. What does that mean? Robust AAC means that your AAC system that you've selected for your learner meets a bunch of different criteria that allow us to know that it has all the features needed to support the learner over time. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it has sufficient vocabulary. That means hundreds and hundreds of words. Goossens, Crane, and Elder say it has to be big enough to grow into, but not so big that they trip over it. And what that means is they need lots of language that they can learn to use, but it can't be so overwhelming that it breaks down the learning process. So we need lots and lots and lots of words, but we want to do that in a supported way. I need to have lots of different kinds of words, so nouns and verbs and describing words. And the other thing there that's really important is personally meaningful words, so words that have a lot of importance to the individual, like rocket or astronaut, right? For joy. It has to allow the learner to communicate for a lot of different reasons. So they need to be able to ask for things, but moreover than that, they need to be able to comment and share their opinions. They have to be able to protest and complain and ask questions and tease friends, right? It needs to be able to support grammar. So as they're learning their language system, it has to grow to include verb tenses so they can talk about things that already happened and things that are going to happen, that kind of thing. Robust AAC has options for pre-programmed messages, which we use for either phrases that are said a lot or advocating for their own needs. So pre-made messages so they don't have to do the language work of putting words together when they really need to advocate for themselves, and self-talk, and that's something that we will probably touch on in a little bit, but language to allow our learners to develop self-regulation skills. So all of those do well when the messages are fully programmed in. We want to make sure that any AAC system that we would consider robust has options to grow language over time. So we're starting with lots of language, but not so much they can trip over it. We need to have options to grow their language over time as their skills grow and develop. We want to be able to, an AAC system to support efficient access, so it can't be really cumbersome. We want it to be relatively easy to find the words you need, and the words that are related to what you're talking about, have them be relatively easy to find. I should note here that all robust AAC is probably going to feel a little overwhelming at first. That doesn't mean it's not efficient, but as our learners develop their skills, we want to make sure that the system's designed in a way that it will be efficient. We want robust AAC to have an organization that supports the flow of conversation. And Ty, maybe in a minute you can talk about the system that you guys selected for Joey.
Sure.
A system has to have an access method that works for the learners. And by works for the learner, I mean it's a good match for their motor skills and for their sensory abilities, be that vision or auditory processing. And a robust AAC system should include use of the full alphabet. So our kids need to have access to that so that they can participate in literacy learning. And finally, a robust AAC system has to be available all the time. And what that often means is that it needs to have both a high-tech electronic version and a non-electronic or paper-based version. So Ty, can you talk a little bit about what system you selected for Joey?
Yeah. So when we were first, diagnosed, I sat through so many free webinars, attended so many conferences, and it definitely was really overwhelming. But the one thing that stood out to me out of everything that was thrown our way was communication is possible for our kids. But outside of that, I still needed to know like how to do it or where to go or what to use. And there were so many different, options for us to choose from. But I think, the biggest support that allowed me to make a decision that was best for Joey and, I would say, our family as well, was interacting with, other families that have already, started their AAC journey. And I also connected with families that were just beginning their AAC journey. And I think that's something that's really cool that our community, provides. I think, outside of Angelman syndrome, yes, we have this amazing community where everybody supports one another. It doesn't matter what your genotype is or anything like that. It doesn't matter, whether you are comfortable with technology or not. Everyone's here to help one another. But then, once you dive into the world of AAC, there's even more support. And at that point, it doesn't matter what your kid's diagnosis is. Forget Angelman syndrome. It's even bigger than that. There's tons of, individuals out there, families, professionals that are willing to support you. And I think that's really where I just put my attention. And eventually, the one that just stood out to me, the AAC that stood out to me that was in fact robust was POD. And for several different reasons. And I think I'm probably pretty unique in saying this. But the part that I love most about it is that there was a light tech option. I did not, well, technology's cool. And having that talker readily available and it's easy to carry and it's light. That was a goal of mine to get there, but that really wasn't the big selling point for me. It really was having access to, a light tech system that allowed Joey the time to process his thoughts. It allowed us to take the time to kind of babble and not make mistakes and not be so distracted by, page turns. Cause I didn't know anything about what I now know is the wait time that's embedded, in the device. I figured that out once we joined you, Kate, and you were treating with Joey privately, we were able to, set all that stuff up when you, moved us on to high tech. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for us was, the fact that POD provides, a light tech option that, it allows us to never go without having Joey's AAC with us. I don't have to worry about battery life or having a backup, device, which I do now, but, we've been on our journey for quite some time now. But I don't care if there's, slime on it or, it gets wet. We've figured out so many different things along the way. But that was the biggest selling point for me. It was having a light tech option available, allowing, us to make mistakes and not be so distracted again by the technology, the glare, the, quick flipping of the pages. And, one thing that was really huge for us, and I didn't have any control of it, it just happened for Joey, was the fact that he developed a really nice point early on. But I know that's not the case for all kids. A lot of kids, they will speak with, or they'll, if they're direct selectors, they'll use, a closed fist or sometimes an open, palm. And using a high-tech device made it much more difficult to kind of kick off, our journey. And those were really the biggest takeaways for me when deciding, which platform we were going to use.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking quite a bit about the smart piece that's embedded into pods. So for a lot of learners early on, all the logistical operational skills that go into using a high-tech device. High-tech devices are really convenient for us as the adults.
Mhm.
They're easier, well, we perceive them as easier to carry around and lighter and all of that, but they aren't necessarily easier for our really early learners who are, as you say, may not have a point, may be distracted by pages that change quickly on high tech, and by using that non-electronic version, you can move slowly, you can interpret their movements a little bit if they're not quite on the line. You know the context, so you can interpret it differently. So that is, you're right, that's a big piece, and that's something that pod offers that a lot of systems don't offer. So that is a big bonus. I would agree. One of the things that we mentioned in the learning strategies is how important it is to be modeling AAC. So when we talk about modeling AAC, what we're talking about is using the AAC system to talk, not to teach, just to interact and connect with the child, and to do that within real life interactions for real reasons that matter to the learner. So we're not sitting down and saying we're going to teach AAC now and these are the words we have to learn. We're just using it to talk to them as you go through the day, as we go through things that matter to them, and talk about those things. Can you want to talk a little bit about that, Ty?
Yeah. So after my first training, I definitely thought I needed to sit down and just have a little AAC chat. Like that it. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I took a training. I was super motivated. I had the support of, my fellow Angelman moms, and we were all going to just do this together. But it is overwhelming in the beginning. And it's like, you really feel that you need to like carve out times during the day to use the system. And I'm not sure at what point, it was different for us where I didn't, sit down and plan for things. One thing I always, recalled from the trainings or just listening to others, speak was that just take small moments and kind of, embed them in your day. Walking around with the AAC is definitely the biggest thing that you need to start doing first, right? But then you need to add some language in there and like, how do you build it into your day? But I think that's what it was for us. It was just small bits. So, I mean, whether it was, around mealtime, which I think mostly everyone starts, it's like mealtime, story time, bath time, like where can I sit down and kind of like, weave a little bit of, modeling into already hectic schedules. So I think that was like the biggest piece of it for us. It wasn't, sitting down and learning, every single page set, or, what's beyond every single page turn, or, all of the branches. I mean, we took it a little bit at a time, and, we started really small and, using like the chat words and just, if I saw Joey looking over in a certain, direction, putting his focus on something. Oh, look, cool. Look how great that is. Or, oh, wow. Oh, no, like something fell. So, I mean, that was like kind of like how we started. And I realized when I was sitting down to make it so structured, I lost him, like he wasn't buying into it. Our kids are really smart. Like he was just like, this is not fun, mom, and once I realized that and started, talking about things that were cool to him or, again, getting down to his level and being on his agenda, that's when we started to kind of grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, follow their lead and
yep.
What's interesting to them. The other piece that I hear you saying is the small steps for rollout. So it's so easy if you try and take on the whole system at once, to get totally overwhelmed. And it is important. You have to have the whole system to start, but that
Absolutely.
doesn't mean you have to use the whole system to start. So just using it a little bit, getting comfortable, and then adding a little bit more, whatever that looks like for your family, can keep you on the path that will get you to where you want to go, because overwhelm is the fastest way to end that journey.
Absolutely.
finding ways just to add a little bit more, be kind to yourself, know that it's not going to be perfect, and it never is for anyone. So to have realistic expectations and just grow it a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and that one key thing you just said right there was be kind to yourself. You have said that to me numerous times, along the way, and it's so true. It's so easy to get overwhelmed by, just everything that comes with having a child with, Angelman, CCN, or complex communication needs, and just multiple disabilities as a whole. Like there's so much that's involved. But yeah, just being kind to yourself and your AAC user, that's really what's helped me tremendously, and if some days it was just too much, like having the AAC nearby was enough. Like if that's all we could get through, for the day, then that was enough. Or a simple good night, greetings and manners, good night, chat words, I love you. Like that's huge. And there were meaningful moments.
Absolutely. All right. So our next key learning strategy is to separate academic learning from communication. And that doesn't mean that we aren't communicating about academic material, but we're not measuring academic progress through the communication system. Our learners need to be able to develop their communication skills, and we don't want them to be tested on those skills. When we put learners in a position where we're testing them, using their AAC, what we're actually doing is making their AAC feel like work. It may make them feel less successful, which will not be motivating, or demotivating. And so instead, what we want to think about doing is, as we talked about, following the learner when they initiate use of their AAC and talking about those things. But when we're doing academic tasks, we want to make those academic tasks as engaging as possible. We can provide alternative communication supports if that's needed. So I know, Ty, you write on whiteboards, or you can use cards or magnet letters, or there's so many other options that they can use to show us or respond within academic teaching that doesn't require that they are showing what they know through their AAC system, because that can really shoot us in the foot. Or really, we want them to learn so much, but that communication piece is so critical lifelong that we don't want academic learning in the moment to take us off that path towards long-term communication. So academic goals should be measured not through the AAC system. And I think the other important thing to think about, because we're talking about learners who are still developing their communication skills, that we're measuring their academic learning over time, and we're looking for evidence that they are learning and evidence that they know something about a particular topic, but not requiring that they demonstrate those skills in a particular moment in time that we've selected for them to do it. Because we know for our learners with Angelman syndrome, it's very difficult for them to organize their body and respond when it wasn't their idea. And so that can work against them showing us what they actually do know. So separating out communication from academic responding, and also as we're assessing academics and as we're assessing communication, honestly, that we're looking at it over a long period of time, and we're kind of developing a portfolio of evidence that, oh, well, look, they are able to do this, or they do know something about this topic, but not quizzing them. You want to talk a little bit about that as it relates to Joey, Ty?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when we're sitting down, working on a homework assignment, or just, just talking about anything that might be a topic that's, being discussed in school, or, we all just went through this whole, world of remote learning. I kind of just let Joey take it all in, yes, we do use, the whiteboards. We will create, lists together. Joey is a part of that. Everything is very much co-authored. He will, make selections, with his, AAC, or, with the use of his, head nods. He's developed a really nice yes and no. And that took us a bit, but with some awesome strategies that you provided us with, Kate, we definitely got there. So, that's definitely been a huge tool for him, to kind of, give responses and, let us know that he is, on track with us, and he is making, decisions on his own, or letting us know that, he knows what certain things are. The other piece of it is, you had said that, it starts to create behaviors when we try to utilize their AAC, to embed teaching. And that's definitely very much so the case for Joey. He will, Kate, you've seen it firsthand. He'll just check out, he'll excuse himself, goodbye, and walk away. I think we definitely need to be creative, when it comes to interacting with our AAC learners and our kids with, AS. They're smart, if they're not into it, or it's not meaningful again to them, they're just going to back away. And then, that creates, a sort of shutdown.
If linked the AAC with the academics, then that kind of desire not to do it is also impacts their use of AAC more broadly, not just in that academic moment.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And that's one thing, I don't feel like, at home we really, struggled with that too much. I feel like that's something that I was able to pick up on pretty quickly with Joey. And, just kind of like observing other families in the community on social media, I think that's the same for a lot of our kids. They're not going to do it, so let's not force them, basically. Right. And I think it's tougher for, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, for parents to know that as they're having conversations with school teams, that it's just so important that we're advocating for a separation of communicate from the AAC learning that we're trying to do long term from the academic goals in that moment.
Yeah, and I think it's taken our team, a long time to understand that. I did say it didn't really, affect us here at home, but I think that's something that I've learned over time, obviously from listening to others or watching, other parents model and stuff like that. But I think most recently, we've had a really nice shift in our team at school where they've come to realize that, and realize that we can use different tools to better understand what Joey knows, whether it be, selecting on a whiteboard, or him watching videos, and then just having a casual conversation about what, he saw, or maybe after reading a passage, some key traits that, he was able to, discuss about the character or point out about a character. So, but it's taken us a while to get there. That did not happen overnight.
Another one of the key strategies that we've highlighted here is monitoring progress in interactive contexts over time versus repeated testing. So really looking to what are our learners showing us when they're having these back and forth interactions, when they're interested and engaged in a topic, rather than trying to assess them, as I said, at a time that we've selected. Going back to the example of Joey and the astronauts, if we had sat down to quiz him on the content of a lesson, he wouldn't have shown us all that he did by his own independent exploration of astronaut and space related topics, right? So as I talked a little bit before about kind of developing a portfolio or collecting evidence of learning over time and trusting that, right? One of the things we've learned with Joey is if he shows us he can do something once or twice, we believe it. We don't need to see it 80% of the time in certain contexts. We know that he's able to do it when his body allows him to do it. So collecting evidence over time is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely hit, touched on a key point right there. Just because they're not able to do something, that they've shown us before doesn't mean that they've lost it. It's just sometimes it's just so hard for them to regulate their bodies to be able to say what they're thinking. There's so much, there's so many motor pieces that go into, utilizing AAC or, getting your thoughts out and then to utilize your AC. And that's something that I've also learned over time as a parent. I definitely worried about it early on, but once I kind of just let that go, kept it really casual. And, again, kept it engaging for him and just supported him and, followed his lead again. That's where we were able to kind of just see some momentum and realize, wow, he really does know a lot about this stuff. And he comes back to it. It's like, oh, Mom, I want to talk about space again, or I want to talk about dinosaurs again, or whatever the case may be. I want to talk about shopping again. It's there. It just comes out in their own time.
Absolutely. So I think it's important that we talk a little bit about the differences in processing. So for a lot of individuals with Angelman syndrome, they're experiencing differences in sensory processing, differences in motor planning, and for some individuals, differences in auditory processing and visual processing. So there's a lot that they're juggling at any one point in time. And Linda Burkhart and Erin Sheldon have talked a bit about learners with Angelman syndrome having a noisy brain. There's just so much competing information or competing activity that they have to kind of work through. So when we're considering supporting these learners, we want to be slowing down and giving them plenty of time, not just for language processing, actually more so for organizing their body and being able to respond. We want to give them a lot of information ahead of time so that they are not asked to do a lot of processing right in the moment. So for Joey, that means telling him about a topic you're going to write about earlier in the day or the day before, so he can give it some thought. And by the time he comes for an activity, he is more able then to organize his body to do it because he has clarity on it. It also means following their lead because, as we said, it's a lot easier to do things when you're doing them on your own agenda. Thinking about repeated experience with a task rather than having to create something or respond in that moment. There's so much learning that happens just by engaging in a task over and over.
This is not something I understood early on in our journey. It took me a lot of time and a lot of correction. You corrected me plenty of times, Kate, and not in a negative way. It was just more so. What's that?
Just learning. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was definitely. There were so many moments where I would observe you communicating with Joey, and it wasn't that you were, saying, Ty, you're doing it wrong. It was never like that. It was me fixing myself. It was like, whoa, like look at look how she's, slowed down the piece and, allowed Joey the time to think about, what was being said in that moment. As a, newly diagnosed family and entering the world of, AAC, you don't know all of this at the beginning. You kind of want to like speed through the book and talk about this and talk about that. And you need to point to this cell and that cell. But it doesn't really take you anywhere. It's not, you're not providing those really rich moments at that point for your AAC user. When I was able to slow things down and realize that Joey had so much going on, I began to give him something like 15 to 30 seconds of hold time, after I had said something, to allow him a chance to, allow his brain to tell his body to, compose a message, or maybe there was a natural gesture that, he chose to use as, his form of communication. And that was okay too. But the processing time is so huge again, because their bodies are dealing with, again, so much. And there's times I think that he'll come back to something that we were talking about almost a day later or 2 days later. I can recall another time here, we were in, I think, our therapy room, downstairs. And I had been I think I was baking or something, Kate, I don't know, but I think I forgot to turn the oven off or something like that. And then at some point, Joey started talking about kitchen and oven, and like, it was so bizarre, but it was like, at that point, at that time, it seemed like so bizarre to me, like kitchen, oven, but like, we were talking about that I probably left the oven on, and like, he was coming back to it and letting us know that he was like involved in that conversation, even though it wasn't a direct conversation I was having with him. It was kind of like, just like a mom moment. I'm like, oh my God, I forgot to turn the oven off, but he was listening. He was processing that. And it wasn't a direct moment of, conversation with him, but it was happening around him. He processed that and let us know that he was listening. And that happens a lot with us, recently actually. But when we bring it back to like the early days and, organizing his body and all of that stuff, I always just tried to take a step back when I noticed that he is not regulated, and give him, that moment, to a moment, or maybe an hour, or maybe even a whole day or so, to kind of just settle down and give his body what it needs. And again, being kind to him, and understanding that he has so much going on.
Not feeling this overwhelming urgency to have it all work right in any particular moment, because it's not going to, and that's okay, and that's expected. Yeah. But it's really about creating rich experiences and then letting them choose when they're gonna express something or show us what they know.
Yeah, anytime like we've forced anything, it doesn't really lead to anything meaningful. It doesn't lead to those communicative exchanges like we all hope for. It just forces him again to shut down or walk away. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing that, I've learned, and I actually think that Joey's, one of his paras at school has come to learn this over the last couple of years, is she's learned to read his body language. You know what I mean? Like, being a smart partner is not just, the person that turns the pages. Like, there's a whole lot that kind of goes into it. And a part of it is, this allowing the processing time, reading your AAC users' body language, and paying attention to, just kind of everything globally. That helps a little bit.
Yeah. That kind of transitions us to one of our other key learning strategies is just awareness of their emotional regulation, and modeling language that allows them to develop their regulation skills. So Joey uses a self-talk boomerang, which sounds funny, but it's a little plastic piece that has some communication, some messages on it around self-regulation, and that's a strategy that comes directly from Linda Burkhart. So messages like that might be: I'm controlling my body, I'm looking, I'm listening. What are some other ones, Ty?
I'm touching gently. I hug with my arms. That's a big one there, just because our kids have so much going on, orally, that, some of those hugs lead into something like a bite, and it's not meant to harm anyone. It's just, they just can't help themselves.
Yeah. And I know some learners, I chew my chewy rather than other things. And modeling that, not from a place of getting them to comply in that moment, but helping increase their awareness of their body, of their feelings. If we're talking about emotion vocabulary, and helping them, as they increase their awareness, learn strategies to support them when they are choosing to regulate themselves. So he has that language on that self-talk boomerang. It's also embedded into his AAC system. And when we're noticing that maybe he is needing some support, modeling some of that language. Do you have any good examples there, Ty?
Yeah, I have lots of examples. We're at a stage now, and our kids hit so many different stages, but we're at a stage now where Joey's, in that whole preteen, I guess, stage world. And I feel like he's really trying to figure out like what's going on with his body. I mean, there is a lot of kind of like really tight, like, he's like gripping, chunks of hair or squeezing to the point where it really hurts. And I have to remind him, I'm like, I'm touching gently, I hug with my arms, I'm controlling my body. He is a big fan of stealing others' food that looks really, really yummy. And that's another phrase that we have on there, or two phrases, that's theirs, that's mine, and I will remind him, self-talk, that's theirs, and we pull back. And I try to remember to speak in a really calm and quiet voice, because I do often say to him, and this is, I don't know if Linda would be upset with me, but I do say sometimes that say to him, I use the voice in my head, and then I will repeat the self-talk phrase at that moment, and I feel like that brings me down a bit. As parents, like, we're quick to want to like reprimand them because they're doing something that isn't appropriate. And so I try to not only regulate myself, but I also try to help him regulate himself. There's another phrase on there that we use often. I did say it already, but it's, I'm touching gently. Here at home, there's a lot. I live in a house of boys, and there's a lot of like, play fighting that goes on. But I don't know if others are experiencing this, but I know it's something that happens here often. Is Joey goes from here to here really quickly, and bringing him back down is really difficult. So, I try to use the self-talk phrases in those moments. And I don't know that that's really fair to him, but I do need him to know that, wrestling or having his, I call them happy slappy hands, but it's really that ataxic movement when he's like, so like, just like, wired, and he can't come down. I just need him to know that he can't do that at school. He will, glasses are huge for him. Hats are huge for him. He wants to take them off of, the faces of others, or remove hats from someone's head. So those are the moments that I'm just like, okay, self-talk, I'm controlling my body, I'm touching gently, and he will eventually come down. But what I've also noticed is that when he's just beyond, I guess, regulating, I hope that I'm saying this correctly. When we've just kind of gotten to the point where there's just no coming down from, that level of excitement, we walk away. We kind of calmly walk away. We don't do that. And I'll remind him, we need to control our bodies. You need to use this, the voice in your head, and change the setting. And that's really something that, I've learned over time. And I think it's okay, as, your AAC user smart partner, or just the person that knows them best, to tell others that it's not okay to, allow them to kind of get so wired. I hope I'm not like, moving into, another area, but that's another thing that I've realized, like, everyone thinks it's a game, but I think we work really hard to allow our AAC users to control their bodies. And sometimes when they get so wired, they're not able to, which then brings on all those other behaviors that no one likes to see, right?
Sounds like we're kind of talking about trying to help keep him in a space that is comfortable for him, because over the top isn't a positive feeling for him, but also keeping him engaged. You don't want to be so down, for lack of a better word, that it's not engaging anymore. So it's keeping in that kind of zone. When we haven't talked a lot about sensory strategies, but when he goes up and over the top, you're talking about shifting the environment, or shifting the activity to help him recover from that. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do. I'm so grateful for, that sensory page that he has embedded into his pod, as well as his, his talker. It's just been huge for us. It's allowed him to, identify when he needs things like squeezes or some deep pressure or rubs, or that there's a host of other things in there that he can ask for. But, one of his biggest things are squeezes and rubs. And that's really helped him, come down, and he does access it on his own now. I access it. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say he's accessing it on his own, in part because it's been modeled for him. So people have noticed over time when it appeared like he needed those things, and they've modeled the language on the AAC as they are then transitioning to provide those things. So he got to see where that language is in his system, how to use it, and how that shift in activity supported him. So now he can advocate for what he needs in those moments.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I should say, speaking of the sensory page and the self-talk pages, when we're talking about self-talk in particular, so I'm controlling my body, I'm looking, I'm listening, I'm touching gently, as you said, those are we do say them in a quiet voice because we're really talking about developing internal language for them that they can remind themselves internally. It may not be, sometimes Joey does select on his self-talk and he's choosing to say it out loud, but really what we're trying to develop is his ability to say that internally to himself. It's in the first person, so it's always an I statement, and it's always a statement about what to do, not what not to do, right? It's a lot harder to inhibit something if you're thinking about it than it is to do the positive action, right? It's I'm touching gently so that we can think about the thing that he's trying to do.
Yeah. And I can see it some days. Sometimes I can really, really see like he's trying his best to just come down from that high that he was on, or the urge to grab that mac and cheese that's across the table because he knows he can't have it. It's totally not LGIT friendly, but but yeah, it's definitely helped him tremendously.
Mm-hmm. I want to be mindful of our time, so I want to shift to talking a little bit about inclusive settings, because I know that has been a big part of your journey with Joey, and then a little bit about both peers and having materials that support. So let's talk a little bit about inclusive settings and peer relationships. So I know that, and I think I speak for both of us here, that really advocate for inclusive settings for our learners. And there's a lot of reasons why I think inclusive settings are particularly helpful. One, I think we need to understand that inclusion is a right. It's not something that our learners earn access to. They have the right to be included with their classmates, and that there's no real readiness for inclusion. Kids get ready when they're given the opportunity. And similarly, teams of professionals get ready and figure out how to support the learner by actually doing the work in that setting. So the idea of readiness actually becomes a barrier to learning, a barrier to be involved, or it ends up meaning that so it can mean that the learner ends up in more secluded settings, one-on-one settings, or that there's performative inclusion. So they're sent in for lunch or they're sent in for music and art, but they're not there for the actual academics. And so I think it's really important that we understand inclusion as a fundamental right. And the benefit of inclusion is so significant. The curriculum is so much more robust. And so there's so much more variety, which will help with interest and motivation and just letting our learners discover new things, as we've talked about, Joey, discovering astronauts in space. The expectations in an inclusive setting are higher, and so there's more opportunities for our learners to rise to those expectations. Inclusive settings are a community, and so it's about belonging to that community. And we talked a little bit about how relationship and belonging is a motivating factor, and it absolutely is. Being in a classroom where lots of other kids are doing the same thing, there's lots of natural modeling built into that, but it's also just about being part of the group and doing what the group does, and so there's so much natural motivation that comes there. When I think about inclusive settings for communication, it's wonderful because we're working in a natural, real life situation. We can take advantage of unexpected, interesting things that happen. there's just so many more communication partners. You're not talking with the same people all day. You have your classmates and other teachers. We also don't have to worry anywhere near as much about quote unquote generalization. So when we think about teaching learners in a one-to-one kind of setting, then we have to figure out how are we going to help them use that skill elsewhere. But if we're learning in the context that we're going to be using that skill, we don't have to worry about that. Ty, you want to talk a little bit about inclusion for Joey? I know it's a big topic.
Yeah. So this has been a goal of ours from the very beginning, from the time that Joey exited, birth to 3 or early intervention, depending on where you are. But it probably is one of the top most important things for me as a parent for him. Being a part of a community is huge. My argument from the beginning with, our school team, and that's really where, these conversations happen. Real life happens with lots of distractions and, Kate said, like real life moments. Life doesn't happen in a room with one individual, without any distractions or closed doors, no windows. I'm just trying to visualize all the different rooms that I've been in. That's important to me for Joey to have connections with, his peers, with his teachers. It's important for him to know how to, again, we talked about regulating their body, how to deal with everything that comes with having Angelman syndrome and being in a classroom full of distractions. Because when he steps outside of, say, that, that room with no windows, and that one individual and into life, it's his world is rocked, right? It's been definitely a huge topic of conversation, with our school team. And Kate, you've offered a ton of support to us, in this arena. I think it's important to me because our kids, that they want to build relationships just like everyone else. Just because they were born, with AS attached to them, I feel like it's always something that they have to carry with them. It's not who they are, it's just something that they have. Joey has built so many strong relationships being in the classroom amongst his peers. They don't question, yes, they have questions about like, why he does certain things or why he needs, a para or, why he uses the device to communicate. But he's just Joey. He's been there from the time that he was 3 and now he's just turned 10. And it's natural for him to be there. And Joey knows how to sit in a classroom and, have a desk in front of him. Granted, we have, another desk on the side of him. So, he's not swiping things and stuff like that, but he should, as well as all kids, that he should have the ability to have access to everything that's, discussed in the gen ed curriculum. It's up to us to be able to tailor that content to make it really meaningful for him. And it's not easy to do, but over time and working as a team has really shifted how we look at inclusion. And it's so exciting to see it unfold. And no, we're not where we need to be right now, but I feel like we're definitely moving in, a positive direction. And even with regard to just communication in a gen ed setting, it is so cool to get little pictures or little, videos that are sent to my phone, on a weekly basis, showing the interaction that Joey is having with his peers, showing moments that would have not been provided if he was in a secluded, one-to-one room or whatever resource room. Joey found recently a buddy in his class that is fascinated by space, and he pushed me to create a page specifically around space for Joey, and now that's what they do together. I got a message from his SLP at school, and she's like, "What do you think about making a dedicated space page?" Because our friend here said that he doesn't have a lot of stuff to to talk about, when it comes to space related things with Joey. And I'm like, I'm right on it. And that has created so many great moments for the two of them. And that's not the only kid that he's interacting with. Most recently, I don't know if this happens in all classrooms, but they do mood meters in our school, and all the kids from pre-K through 5 all talk about their mood at the beginning of the day. And most recently, Joey's pod is up on the smart board, and all of the kids have an opportunity to either say verbally how they're feeling. They get to use Joey's pod. They get to use the modeling talker to say how they're feeling. And they use colors. So if they're happy, they're yellow, or if they're, having a kind of gloomy day, I think they're green or blue. But the one that I'm going to try and not get emotional here, but Kate, I shared this with you recently, but there's a little boy, our friend in his class that, isn't always able to organize his body to get his thoughts out. And he had a really great moment recently, and this was shared with me, and it's amazing to kind of just have these emotions and understand that my child's AAC provided a huge moment for another child. He, being a part of that classroom, benefited another kid. And, going back to this mood meter thing, the child was asked, would you like to share, how you're feeling today, verbally, or would you like to use the talker or the pod book? And that kid ran up to the front of the room and wanted to use the talker and, say what he needed to say and, show his class how he was feeling. But he couldn't organize his body to get, out what he wanted to say, even though he does have, spoken language. It's just something that he's dealing with. And he doesn't have an AAC, but Joey's allowed him to get his message out and be heard versus somebody just passing over him and thinking he had nothing to say. So while, Joey is benefiting from all the kids in the class and seeing, what it's like to be a typical student and having, really great moments of what it's like to be a student in a gen ed classroom look like, Joey's also providing, huge supports for others as well. So I can go on for a long time about this, but sense of community is the biggest takeaway for me. That's really what I want here for him.
Yeah, you hit on so much there. I think it is, we talk about peer models, and one of our learning strategies is incorporating peer models into learning. So allowing peers to use the AAC so that the learner with AS can benefit from their models. But the truth is, we're really talking here about a community of learners, and there's so much that going both directions, learning that can happen. And that's valuable for everybody in the class, be it in your example, a kid benefiting from the strategies, but also just learning what it is to be a community member and everybody having different needs and that being normal and okay. And that we can accommodate all different kinds of learners. And I think the other piece that is and I love I hadn't heard about the space page. Oh. What I love about that is that's an authentic connection those two kids have. When kids are in secluded or more restricted environments, often then we're trying to create opportunities for them to interact with other kids and develop relationships. And the moment you introduce adults into that, they're not authentic relationships anymore. So by being in that inclusive setting, you're really offering an opportunity to develop authentic relationships and authentic relationships that are equal. We're not talking about the peers as little teachers or, doing something to facilitate the therapy for a kid. We're really just talking about them being kids together and connecting. And that is so much more possible in inclusive settings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited for where we are right now and hopefully to see where we're headed.
Absolutely. And then our last learning strategy that we haven't hit on yet is having all your materials ready well chosen, and that I think that speaks really specifically to the academic environment. It also relates to the AAC, right? So as you're selecting your AAC system, we talked a little bit about what robust systems are, and they need to be accessible. You have to have a really well-selected AAC system and a well-selected robust system. But when we're thinking about learning, there's also a lot of materials that come with that, and we've touched a little bit on sensory processing differences and attention. And I think that there's, I know we've learned with Joey that certain materials in a classroom can become more interesting themselves than the content on them or the lesson that's happening. And so selecting materials that aren't more interesting or don't take attention. I think about it as signal to noise, right? Like they're not louder than sometimes in reality, but they're not they don't take more attention than other things. So I know for Joey, we've looked at whiteboards. Sometimes that means having things that are laminated so that you can't crinkle them or put into a page protector, or a firm page protector, so that he can focus on the content of the information rather than on the sensory properties of them. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Ty?
Yeah, I've found that being as prepared as possible has eliminated the opportunity for more distraction than what just happens naturally. Whether it's, having, our pod book's always out, but having access to his pod, he's always wearing his talker. I'm not, strapping on his, harness. So he's wearing his talker. Everything's kind of where it needs to be at the top of our morning or at the start of our day. If you're, I know we're talking about school settings, but even if you're out and about, like having all your backups, available and planning, science sounds kind of cheesy, but planning for success, so you don't feel so overwhelmed, whether you're new on your AAC journey or you've been in it a while. I talked a lot about my love for, light tech versus, high tech. Yes, we use both. Joey's always wearing his AAC, his talker. Yes, I always have my modeling talker on me. But I found that sometimes it's just easier, to have that pod book's right there and readily available. If I need a whiteboard, I make sure I have that out, markers, erasers. So I'm not getting up and leaving him and creating moments where he's just going to kind of check out. So that's really been key for us. And always having, again, we talked about the SelfTalk boomerang, like that's always, out and ready. If we're going to be utilizing a keyboard or some sort of alternative pencil, it's available and it's right there for him to use. And he gets to make the choice on what he wants to use as well.
Yeah, and that's something that gets easier with time, right?
Absolutely.
Initially, it probably felt overwhelming because you weren't quite sure what would work. But this goes back to support people getting ready by doing the support in the real situations. Yep. It's like, because we've done worksheets in the classroom and seen how that doesn't go well, we've problem solved that to figure out ways that work better for him. And so as time's gone on for him as a learner, we know what kind of supports work well and what kind of supports don't. And that's allowed us more and more to focus on the content that we want him to be learning rather than the materials.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm using a tripod or I'm displaying something, on my screen, on my laptop or projecting onto the wall, I try to make certain that all of that is set up before I invite him to join me. And the same thing happens in school. We've really worked hard at, making them aware of what would work best. Mm-hmm. And like you said, removing all those things that can be a distraction. But you've actually helped a ton with just allowing Joey to have a fidget of some sort in his hand to allow his brain to, think and process, while he's getting him, the squeezes and rubs that he needs. And he's doing it on his own, but still engaged in the content.
Yeah, we didn't touch on that, but that is huge. Having sensory supports built in, and that fidget has been huge for him. And again, this strategically chosen or developed over time, that it can't be, so he holds a little bit of Play-Doh in his hand. It can't be too big or it can't come with a cup because then it becomes overwhelming, but it has to be enough that he can just hold it and kind of get that input from it. And that really does help him listen. And we've had direct conversations with him about it. So he knows that's what it's for, and he'll advocate for it when he needs it, sometimes just by getting up and getting it, but he knows that it helps him, and that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for those handheld fidgets now because they fit so nicely in his hands. And even if he just needs to pop a little bit, we mentioned Play-Doh, and then he has found a love for, I always say this wrong, I think it's called mold magic or
model magic.
Model magic. Like there's a little bit of a difference in the feel. Mm-hmm. And it's a little firmer, and it's not like the Therapetty, and it's definitely not like the Play-Doh. It doesn't dry out as quickly, but it's, again, we've explored so many different things, and he has a toolbox full of things that help him, whether it be to communicate, to write, or to regulate himself.
Yeah, and because his body's so complex, he gets to decide, because he is the only one with all the information, right? He gets to kind of pick what will work best for him in that moment. And I think as the people supporting him, we've over time gotten more and more confident about his ability to do that, and Absolutely. To trust him, because that he does know what he needs. So sure. I think we've gone through all of our strategies, and we're probably running low on time. But I think any kind of final thoughts, Ty, or things you would want families to know who are earlier on this journey than you?
So a few things that I was thinking about is, what questions parents might have, after attending a conference, since there's so much content that's thrown their way. But with regard to AAC, one of the biggest things that stood out for me is, how do I know which system to choose, for my child or my loved one, beginning this journey? And, I have to say, I think, attend as many webinars as you can. There's so many free ones out there. Look in your Angelman Facebook pages. There's a lot of just great content in there. I know Erin Sheldon ran the Angelman communication series many years back. That stuff, I'm sure, still is there. There is the individual pod groups that you can join if that's what you choose, the choice that you make for your loved one. But I believe you can still access the group even if your kid is not on pod, specifically for the parent page, not the professional page. I'm not certain there. But I'm sure, Proloquo and some of the other systems out there have their own pages as well. But again, I think you need to sit back and think about like what the most important thing for you is, but more so especially for your child. Like, is it light tech? Is it being able to kind of slow the pace of things down and having access to AAC without worrying about like just all the technology and other distractions?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Ty. I think that so often families feel like they have to wait for a professional to tell them what to do. And I routinely tell parents that they are the most important person in that decision-making process, because you're going to be the person who's with your kid day in and day out for the long haul. And so, with great respect to my colleagues out there, not all SLPs are really well versed in AAC. So it's really important that parents are a big voice in that conversation.
Yeah, and that leads me into, my next question, does my child need to have a speech evaluation before beginning our AAC journey? And while my answer is probably not, would apply to both, while our journey began much different, let's put it that way, the short answer is no. You don't need an AAC evaluation to begin your journey. We did eventually have an evaluation at some point in time once Joey entered our neighborhood school, but I made the decision on what system he was going to be on before that ever occurred. And being involved in so many different, webinars and attending so many conferences and having like great conversations around AAC with parents already on their journey, parents starting their journey, finding people like, you, Kate, allowed me to have really educated conversations in, a PPT or an IEP meeting, depending on where you are, how you refer to those meetings. But it allowed me to really have a healthy conversation about what was, fact-based versus, not, and like what really goes on when you are introducing AAC to an emergent learner without attending, all of those webinars and having like these healthy conversations with others in our community. I don't think I'd be where I am right now. An informed parent, an educated parent is really the best support for your child. So it's not easy. There was a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of tears, but here we are. I just would say push, and don't take no for an answer. Again, Kate said it. You know what's best for your kid. You guys are living it every single day. You don't just do AAC at school. It's all day, every day.
That's the Instagram account, right?
Oh yeah,
a little plug there.
Yeah.
Not all day, every day.
Yeah, but it truly is. I mean, and that was the point of creating, that page for me. We don't just do it some of the time; we do it all the time. So if you're looking for me on social media, you can find me at AAC all day, every day. I am in the Angelman parent group, so you can definitely find me there as well.
Okay. That's great. I think if I were going to just say final thoughts, that it is possible. It is a process, and it is a long process. And so staying on the path is more important than any one moment in time. So being kind to yourself, knowing that it's okay to take the time to figure it out, and that it's not going to be perfect in the moment, but over time you'll look back and say, oh, we figured so much out and we're doing so much better than we were doing. And so being kind to yourself and just allowing yourself to be in the place you are, and know that it's an evolution, and a lot is possible if you keep at it. In terms of me, you can find me at the AAC Coach on Facebook and Instagram. And I also welcome people to reach out to me if you have questions. And I do my very best to get back to those as best I can. But this was a lot of fun, Ty. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Oh my God, I am so grateful and just so excited to be doing this with you. And thank you for thinking of me.
Of course, I always think.
All
right. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody.